East Germany, officially the German Democratic Republic. For most of its history, this country was not at all democratic, though. It was an impressive Marxist-Leninist one-party dictatorship. And I kind of suspect you may know this already. But what you may not know is that the ruling Socialist Unity Party, known by its German initials as the SED, was not East Germany's only political party. In the East German parliament, the Volkskammer, there were also deputies from 4 other legal parties, along with deputies from 5 other mass organizations, who were meant to represent the various parts of East German society. What's even more surprising is that while East Germany disappeared soon after the fall of the Berlin Wall, the parties and organizations which made up the Volkskammer did not. In fact, it could be argued that 9 of them, out of 10, still exist today in one form or another. And one of them actually has the same name, the exact same stated goals, and the exact same political agenda. Hi, I'm Fredo Rockwell, and welcome to another edition of Strange Politics. This video is about the political structure of East Germany, and specifically what happened to it after East Germany was absorbed into the newly reunified German Federal Republic in 1990. If you like the topic of this video and want to see more videos about strange politics, be sure to hit the subscribe button, the bell, and please like and comment on this video so YouTube will show it to more people. Okay then. For over 40 years, East Germany was a brutal dictatorship ruled by the Socialist Unity Party, the SED, which in turn took its orders from the Soviet Communist Party leadership in Moscow. One of the most notorious features of the SED regime was its secret police agency, the Ministry of State Security, or the Stasi. The Stasi spied on, arrested, tortured, and killed East German citizens on a pretty regular basis, and it did this with the help of an extensive network of informants. It is now thought that at its height, the Stasi employed 174,000 informants in a country of only 16 million people. That's roughly 2.5% of the adult population. And, as in real-life East Germany, the Stasi will be making unexpected and unwanted appearances throughout the story of this video, so be forewarned. Officially, of course, East Germany was not an oppressive dictatorship. But lots of things in politics are officially different from what they actually appear to be in real life. For example, Senator Josh Hawley does not officially advocate the violent overthrow of the U.S. government. To keep up the ruse that East Germany was actually a free, democratic country, a largely fictional political structure was created, the centerpiece of which was a rubber stamp legislature, the Volkskammer. You might think the Volkskammer sounds like a badly made East German car, but no. That was the Trabant. For most of its history, the Volkskammer was made up of 500 deputies, each belonging to either one of 5 different legal political parties or one of 5 different mass organizations. The 5 political parties were the previously mentioned Socialist Unity Party, which, despite having a total monopoly on political power, only occupied a mere 127 seats, just over 25% of the total. The remaining 4 parties were called Blockpartei, or block parties, and although these appeared to be independent, they were in fact totally subservient to the SED in every way. And also, just to ensure that these parties never aspired to gain any real power, the East German Constitution mandated that the SED be the country's ruling party, no matter what. But anyway, the 4 block parties were the Christian Democratic Union of Germany, or CDU, which had 52 seats. This party was meant to appeal to, well, Christians. In reality, it promoted a corrupted version of Christianity, which it claimed was compatible with communist ideals, even though communism is a resolutely atheist ideology. If you're familiar with German politics, you may recognize this name. Another CDU is currently the ruling party in Germany today. But for the rest of this video, unless I say otherwise, please assume that the term CDU applies to the East German Bloc Party. No legislature is complete, of course, without a party called the Liberal-Demokratische, and East Germany was no exception. Like the CDU, the Liberal-Democratic Party of Germany was also allocated 52 seats in the Volkskammer. In theory, the Liberal Democrats promoted a more liberal form of politics, which encouraged self-reliance and a smaller state. But in reality, the party towed the line of the communist regime. Its membership was made up mostly from the middle classes and tended to be younger. Both the CDU and Liberal Democrats were actually formed a few years before the establishment of East Germany, so they had at least some history as genuine political parties. This was not the case for the other two bloc parties, which were created by the regime out of thin air. These were the National-Democratic Party of Germany, or NDPD, which, like the Liberal Democrats and Christian Democrats, also had 52 seats. Are you sensing a pattern here? The NDPD was created to appeal to East Germans with a strong sense of German patriotism and who didn't have a political home after the end of World War II. I'm not going to mention the party members they were trying to appeal to by name for fear of offending the YouTube algorithm, but I think you can guess who I mean. The other totally fake party was the Democratic Farmers' Party of Germany, or DBPD, which, you guessed it, had 52 seats. The DBPD had been designed to appeal to rural East Germans, with the hope that they would not support the CDU or Liberal Democrats. This would make it harder, in theory, for either of these parties to develop enough of a following to become a political threat. As you may have guessed, one of the purposes of these bloc parties was to provide a controlled and subservient outlet for political expression, but in a way in which no bloc party would ever grow too large and inadvertently threaten the legitimacy of the communists. It was a classic case of divide and rule. The bloc parties themselves were largely understood by East Germans to be toothless, at least in terms of real political power, but membership was nevertheless pretty widespread. Most bloc parties had hundreds of thousands of members. One reason for this, if you were a member of a bloc party, you didn't have to worry about being pressured to join the communist SED. Also represented in the Volkskammer were 5 mass organizations, which were not actual political parties. This might seem like a strange idea, giving seats in a parliament to civic groups, but similar systems have been used in legislatures around the world, like Indonesia in the 1970s or Hong Kong today, where too much democracy is seen as a bad thing. The 5 organizations in the Volkskammer were the Free German Federation of Trade Unions, which, as you might expect, was made up of trade unions. It had 61 seats. The Free German Youth, the official youth organization of East Germany. It was very similar to the Komsomol in the Soviet Union, if you're familiar with that group. It had 32 seats. The Democratic Women's Association of Germany, the official state women's organization, which also had 32 seats. The Kulturbund, East Germany's official cultural organization with writers, artists, and the like, and it had 21 seats. And lastly, the Farmers Mutual Aid Society, which was the mass organization for farmers, and had 14 seats. These mass organizations, as the name implied, tended to have massive memberships. One big reason to join was the holiday benefits. Young people who belonged to the Free German Youth had access to youth-oriented summer camps, and the Farmers Mutual Aid Society owned a special hotel called the Ringberg House, which only society members were allowed to stay in. Having the mass organizations represented in the Volkskammer also provided an advantage to the regime. Deputies from these groups tended to also be members of the ruling SED, giving the party direct control over a majority of the chamber, but allowing the SED to only appear to control a quarter of the seats. The seat tallies I've given you are from the 1986 elections, the last to be held before the communist regime fell apart. But the allocation between parties and organizations barely changed from election to election, so it's a fairly representative tally. But if you think filling up the Volkskammer with fake parties and mass organizations it controlled was enough for the SED, wait, there's more. To further maintain control over every party and every group in the Volkskammer, they were all forced to be part of an electoral coalition called the National Front. Every election, the National Front put up a single list of candidates. No other candidates were allowed to run, so East Germans had no option but to vote for the names on the ballot they received. This produced the bizarrely consistent results in the Volkskammer seat allocations, but even then, the regime appears to have faked the election results. The official turnout percentage in 1986 was an outrageously high 99.74% of registered voters. Then, in late 1989, everything changed. This is a complicated bit of history, but in a nutshell, East German citizens were suddenly, on November 9th, somewhat accidentally, allowed to travel into West Berlin for the first time in 30 years. Pretty soon the Berlin Wall, which had separated East and West Berlin, was being dismantled, and the leaders of the East German regime, realizing that the gig was up, resigned en masse. Without the communist dictatorship to pull the strings, the Volkskammer, which had for decades been a rubber-stamp legislature which always did as it was told, suddenly became an actual parliament with actual power. 5 months after the fall of the Berlin Wall, in March 1990, East Germany held its first, and only, free national election, and for the first time the SED and its bloc parties were forced to compete for votes, with each other and with a host of new parties which began springing up. Amazingly, astoundingly really, every party and mass organization represented in that 1986 Volkskammer survived, with one notable exception, and each continues to survive today, in one form or another. Let's go through what happened to each of them, starting with the political parties. The leaders of the SED were, of course, by default, the rulers of East Germany. Longtime leader Erich Honecker was ousted a few weeks before the Berlin Wall fell by Egon Krenz. By the way, Krenz is the one who sort of accidentally authorized travel into West Berlin, hastening the end of the regime. A few weeks after the wall fell, the Volkskammer started flexing its muscles for the first time and removed the section of the constitution which mandated that the SED would always be the ruling party. 2 days after that, the entire leadership of the SED, including Krenz, who had only become the East German leader a few weeks previously, resigned. A group of younger reformist members, led by Gregor Gysi, seized control of the party. They dumped the Marxist-Leninist ideology and changed the party's name to the Party of Democratic Socialism, or PDS, a name which is, accidentally on purpose, very similar to the name of West Germany's main center-left party, the Social Democratic Party, or SDP. In the March 1990 elections, the newly minted PDS came in a respectable second place with just over 20% of the vote, giving it 88 seats in the new Volkskammer. Not what you expected, right? Not what a lot of people expected, actually. Following the reunification of East and West Germany in October 1990, the PDS carried on, running for national and local elections. For the first few decades after reunification, it carved out a niche for itself as a champion of issues affecting former East German citizens, and would often win between 15 to 25% of the vote in the former East German states. This led to the PDS forming coalition governments with the center-left SDP in 2 former East German states, Mecklenburg-Vorpommern and Berlin. In 2007, the PDS merged with a party called Labor and Social Justice, which itself had begun as a more leftist faction in the center-left SDP. This new party is now known simply as Die Linke, or the Left. The Left is currently represented in the legislatures of 10 of Germany's 16 states and has just under 10% of the seats in the German federal parliament, the Bundestag. So yes, the SED, the former ruling party of East Germany, is still going strong, just with a different name. The 4 bloc parties still survived as well, although in a much less visible way. The National-Demokratische Party and the Democratic Farmers' Party had the most obvious struggle. Both parties have been created by the SED as a way to keep non-communists in East Germany divided, and their lack of genuine grassroots support became obvious once they started having to actually compete for votes. The Democratic Farmers tried to reinvent themselves as a sort of pro-environment party, but that didn't work. They got only 2.2% of the votes in the 1990 election, which meant their seat total dropped from 52 to just 9. Soon after that result, the party executive voted overwhelmingly to merge with its fellow bloc party, the Christian Democratic Union. We will get to what happened to them in a moment. The 1990 election was an even bigger disaster for the National Democrats, who received a mere 0.4% of the vote and got a tiny allocation of just 2 seats in the Volkskammer. Like the Democratic Farmers, the National Democrats decided to throw in their lot with a fellow bloc party, this time the Liberal Democrats. So let's talk about them, the Liberal-Democratic Party of Germany. It was one of the first bloc parties to publicly criticize the old regime, and initially it hoped to become the voice of a new, free East Germany. A month before the March 1990 election, it formed a coalition with several new liberal parties, which it called the Association of Free Democrats. But this coalition flopped at the polls, getting a mere 5.3% of the vote and 21 seats in the new Volkskammer. As mentioned before, the National Democrats soon joined the coalition too, but by that point, this wasn't much of a big deal. After German reunification, the various parties in the Association of Free Democrats merged with their closest equivalent in West Germany, the Free Democratic Party, or FDP. The FDP was a very well-established party in West Germany, but was also relatively small. With the influx of hundreds of thousands of former Liberal Democrats and National Democrats, the small party tripled its membership overnight. The former bloc parties also had extensive physical and organizational assets in East Germany that they could bring to the table, and initially the Free Democrats looked set to enjoy a huge surge in electoral support. But the assets of the former bloc parties were mostly seized by the unified German government, and most former bloc party members resigned from the Free Democrats within a few months. So the FDP did not gain too much from the merger. But several former leaders from both bloc parties continued to have long careers from within the FDP, including former Liberal Democrats chairman Rainier Ortlieb and former National Democrats chairman Wolfgang Rauss, who was a successful FDP politician in the German state of Saxony-Anhalt, during which time he was exposed as a former informant for the Stasi. Surprise! So through their mergers with the Free Democrats, which currently has 11% of the seats in Germany's parliament, the Bundestag, both the National Democrats and Liberal Democrats live on, in a manner of speaking. The most successful bloc party in the 1990 election was the Christian Democratic Union. About the same time that longtime East German leader Erich Honecker was ousted from the top of the SED, the CDU ousted its longtime chairman Gerold Gotting, who was replaced as chairman by a reformer named Lothar de Maizière. Maizière became one of the most important figures in East Germany's brief democratic period. He led the CDU into the Alliance for Germany, a coalition with two new parties known as the German Social Union and Democratic Awakening. Remember that last one. Under Maizière's leadership, the Alliance for Germany advocated a speedy unification with West Germany, and this proved to be an extremely popular idea with voters. In the 1990 election, the alliance got over 48% of the vote, nearly an outright majority, and 192 seats. Triumphant, Maizière became the country's first democratically elected prime minister. This result was in spite of a pretty serious scandal for the alliance. Just days before the election, the leader of Democratic Awakening, Wolfgang Schnurr, was exposed as a former Stasi agent. Not only had he been denouncing dissidents to the secret police, but it turned out he had continued informing to the Stasi about his own party, Democratic Awakening, during the election. Schnurr was booted out of the party, and, badly damaged, Democratic Awakening decided to fully merge into the CDU in August 1990. Following German reunification in October 1990, the CDU of East Germany formally merged into the CDU of West Germany, which was conveniently in power at the time under Helmut Kohl. Maizière became deputy chairman of the newly united CDU and was given a ministerial position in Kohl's government. 2 months later, however, Maizière was also exposed as a former Stasi agent himself, and he was forced to resign. But the East German bloc parties, the Democratic Farmers' Party and the CDU, definitely lived on after East Germany ended through the newly united CDU. Former Democratic Farmer Party chairman Ulrich Junghans went on to have a very successful career in politics as a CDU politician, including being elected as deputy premier in the state government of Brandenburg. But the biggest legacy of the East German CDU has to be Angela Merkel. Merkel joined Democratic Awakening soon after the fall of the Berlin Wall and was deputy government spokesperson under Lothar de Maizière. She became a member of the East German CDU following the merger with Democratic Awakening and then a member of the unified CDU. Her rise to power has been steady, and since 2005 she has been Chancellor of Germany, the German equivalent of Prime Minister. I don't think there's any doubt that she has been the most successful politician in German post-war history. So what about the mass organizations? What happened to them? The Free German Federation of Trade Unions, known by its German initials as the FDGB, truly was a massive organization. Membership was not compulsory, but it was pretty much impossible to get a job without being a member, and besides, the FDGB controlled the majority of the holiday bookings available each year, so if you wanted to bask in the summer sun on the Baltic coast, you had to join up. In 1986, it could count 9.6 million East Germans as members, well over half the country's population. But despite its vast size, the FDGB did not last long once the old regime collapsed. It tried to contest the 1990 elections, but its application to run as a political party was denied by the Electoral Commission. Totally unprepared for the new Germany which was emerging, the FDGB dissolved itself just before reunification, and its assets were seized by the state, making it the only member organization from the 1986 Volkskammer not to have survived the transition in one form or another. Next, let's look at the Democratic Women's League of Germany, or DFD, which boasted an impressive 1.5 million members in its heyday. On the surface, its role was to promote the rights of women, but in reality, its main job was to mobilize the women of East Germany to support the communist regime. After the fall of the Berlin Wall, the DFD was allowed to contest the March 1990 elections as a political party, but it only received about 5,000 votes, enough to elect just a single deputy. Despite losing almost all of its political relevance, the DFD carried on. In October 1990, it reorganized itself into a non-profit organization with a slightly different name, the Democratic Women's League. In other words, it dropped the of Germany at the end. 30 years on, and the Democratic Women's League is still going strong, although on a much smaller scale than before. Now with an estimated membership of about 5,000, the group has several active chapters, mostly in former East Germany. In its current incarnation, the Democratic Women's League still promotes equal rights for women, although in a much more genuine way, I would suspect, runs shelters for the homeless, and helps immigrants integrate into German life. Since 1994, it has been led by Brigitte Triems, who between 2008 and 2012 served as president of the main umbrella group for women's organizations in the EU, the European Women's Lobby. The Kulturbund, East Germany's cultural mass organization, almost didn't survive the transition to democracy. At a meeting in November 1989, its entire executive council resigned. In May 1990, what was left of the Kulturbund held a national meeting and resolved to carry on, reforming itself into a non-profit organization called Kulturbund e.V., or EV if you use the English pronunciation. That's the designation for a type of non-commercial organization in Germany. Although it no longer has any seats in any parliament, or the strong support of an oppressive dictatorial regime, the Kulturbund e.V. has managed to cling on. According to its website, it has over 150 member organizations and supports every kind of cultural activity, from literature, music, and theater to stamp collecting and, I kid you not, guppy breeding. But then also on the same page it says, the Kulturbund currently has no management, which is not a great sign. The Farmers' Mutual Aid Society was one of East Germany's smaller mass organizations, with only about 630,000 members in the 1980s. But it was also one of the most complex, as besides its deputies in the Volkskammer, it also ran the farmers' trade cooperatives, which performed an important function in East Germany's planned economy, and it also ran a series of regional credit unions, which are a type of cooperatively owned bank. Most of these various components disappeared around the time of German reunification, either by voluntarily disbanding or by being absorbed by similar groups in West Germany. But the Cooperative Association of Saxony, a local credit union based in East Germany's southeast, carried on and continued offering banking services to rural residents of Saxony for decades. In 2004, it merged with the Central German Cooperative Association, which in 2013, in turn, became a founding member of a new national association of regional cooperatives known as the Genossenschaftsverband e.V. Although the Genossenschaftsverband is made up of cooperatives from across Germany, it makes no secret of its partial origins in the former East German dictatorship. The Free German Youth, the official youth wing of the SED, played an important role in the lives of most East Germans between the ages of 14 to 25. It organized entertainment like concerts and discos, ran summer holiday clubs, and, most importantly, it was nearly impossible to get entry into a university or get onto many career paths if you were not a member. Known by its German initials as the FDJ, it boasted 2.3 million members at its height and claimed to be the fighting reserve of the SED. But after the fall of the Berlin Wall, the FDJ struggled to remain relevant. In November 1989, the FDJ expelled its leader, Eberhard Aurich. It was allowed to contest the March 1990 elections as a political party and formed an alliance with three other new youth-focused parties, the German Youth Party, Green Youth, and a Marxist group called Young Left. This new alternative youth list failed miserably and won no seats in the Volkskammer. The FDJ did not disband, however, even though from this point its membership began to crater. By November 1990, its 2.3 million members had shrunk to just 22,000. 6 months later, its membership had shrunk to 7,000, and by 1996, it was down to just 300 members. And even though it's not clear exactly how many members the FDJ has currently, it nevertheless persists, with a newspaper, a website, and an unreconstructed Marxist-Leninist ideology, which is more or less unchanged since the collapse of the East German state. On January 10th, 2021, while I was actually researching this video, the FDJ took part in an annual protest in Berlin, commemorating the 1919 execution of communist heroes Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht. There were red flags, riot police, and arrests. Most of the people taking part in the protests were probably there from other communist organizations, but there were several FDJ banners, and the fact that the story made it up on the FDJ website is a sign that the organization remains at least somewhat active. When the ruling SED rebranded itself as the Party of Democratic Socialism, it decided to drop its official relationship with the FDJ, and it even founded a new youth wing of its own, just to make it clear that the FDJ wasn't wanted anymore. The current incarnation of the SED, the left, more or less pretends that the FDJ doesn't even exist anymore. Or it would like to. Both organizations have their headquarters in the same Berlin office building. Awkward. And so that's it. Of the 10 organizations represented in the 1986 Volkskammer, 9 still exist in one form or another, and 1 still exists with the same political program as ever, although vastly reduced in size and influence. Thanks for watching. How surprised were you to find out these organizations existed in the first place, or that they continue on today? Let me know in the comments, and also be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that bell. Bye for now.